Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something pretty important if you're trying to keep pace with generative AI.
Which is moving incredibly fast.
Exactly. It's about those leaderboards.
Yeah.
The ones telling us which AI models are supposedly the best. How much should we actually trust them?
Yeah, it's a critical question.
We're really zeroing in on Chatbot Arena today. It's become, well, kind of a go-to platform for evaluating these systems.
It has, yeah. And to really get under the hood here, we've got this fascinating research paper. It's called the Leaderboard Illusion.
The Leaderboard Illusion.
Okay. And it's basically a deep dive itself. They analyze a ton of data from Chatbot Arena,
Right.
trying to figure out if those rankings, actually match up with how these models perform out in the real world.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then.
Right.
We want to unpack this research, understand what's really going on, and figure out how much weight you, listening, should give those Chatbot Arena rankings.
Precisely. What are the hitting factors? What maybe should make you pause when you see a model shoot to the top?
Because Chatbot Arena, it had this big appeal, right? It used real users, real comparisons. It felt like it filled a gap left by the more traditional academic benchmarks, which sometimes felt a bit disconnected.
Totally. Those benchmarks often miss the mark for these really open-ended conversational AIs. So yeah, Chatbot Arena seemed like a dynamic, evolving solution, a game changer almost.
It definitely felt like a fresh approach, seeing the models go head-to-head like that. But I guess this research is asking the big question, is that #1 rank really the ultimate sign of the best AI?
Is it truly reliable? Is it telling the whole story?
Yeah. So let's dig in. The paper kicks off by mentioning, well, the risk of relying too much on any single measure. They bring up Goodhart's law.
Yeah, Goodhart's law. Yeah, super relevant here. The classic, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Right.
And the researchers basically argue that the intense focus on getting that top spot on Chatbot Arena might be pushing providers to, well, chase the rank. Through strategies that don't necessarily mean genuine improvement in AI's core smarts. It could be more about gaming the leaderboard itself.
Okay, optimizing for the test, essentially. That's potentially a big issue. What kind of evidence did they find?
Well, their core argument really focuses on certain provider behaviors and also some of Chatbot Arena's own policies that might be feeding into this gamification.
And they looked at a lot of data to back this up.
Oh, yeah. They analyzed something like 2 million user votes. These head-to-head battles covered 42 providers, 243 different models.
Wow.
All between January 2024 and April 2025. So a pretty solid window of activity.
2 million interactions is huge. So what specific things did they flag as potentially, skewing the results?
Okay, so one of the really big ones, and kind of surprising, is what the paper calls an undisclosed Chatbot Arena policy.
Undisclosed. That sounds concerning.
Yeah. It seems certain preferred providers were apparently allowed to test multiple different versions or variants of their models privately within the Arena system.
Privately, meaning the public couldn't see these tests happening.
Exactly. So a provider could, say, submit maybe 10, 20 different experimental versions, checkpoints in their development process, let them run in the arena, get user feedback, but only behind the scenes, and then only the single version that performed the absolute best in those private trials would be officially submitted and ranked publicly.
Whoa. Okay, so it's like holding secret auditions and only showing us the star performer.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. You don't see all the attempts, just the one that nailed it.
That could definitely give a skewed impression. Did the paper quantify this? Like
Yes.
how much private testing was actually happening?
They did, and the numbers are pretty stark. They point to figure 6 in their paper. Obviously, we can't show it, but they found Meta, for example, tested 27 private variants before releasing Llama 4.
27.
27.
Oh.
And Google tested 10 private versions before Gemma 3.
Okay.
Meta also apparently tested another 16 private vision models on a separate leaderboard.
Wow. And how does that compare to, say, smaller players?
Well, they contrast that with outfits like Reka AI, which reportedly only had one active private variant during that same observation period. A huge difference in scale.
Massive difference. So this best of N strategy, as they call it, how does that actually mess with the rankings? Statistically, I mean.
It fundamentally undermines a key assumption of the Bradley-Terry model. That's the statistical method Chatbot Arena uses to calculate the rankings.
Okay.
The BT model relies on unbiased sampling. But if you're running tons of private tests and only putting your best foot forward publicly, That sample isn't unbiased anymore.
Right, you're selecting the peak, not the average.
Precisely. You're presenting a potentially inflated view of your model's typical performance.
So the rank might reflect a lucky run in private testing, not necessarily consistent superiority.
That's the risk. And they actually ran simulations to show this figures 7 and 8 conceptually.
What did the simulations show?
They show that the more private variants you test, the higher the probability you'll find one that gets a statistically higher score, maybe even an outlier score. And they even showed how a whole family of models that might, on average, be slightly weaker could actually leapfrog a stronger family on the leaderboard just by testing more variants privately.
That is a real eye-opener. So the top spot could be more about the volume of private testing than the actual underlying quality difference.
It certainly raises that possibility. It suggests the leaderboard reflects not just capability, but also testing strategy and resources, like seeing only the gold medalists, not the qualifying rounds or the other competitors.
And the paper mentioned, anecdotally, the rapid churn at the top, like OpenAI, XAI, Google swapping places quickly.
Yeah, they suggest that kind of rapid turnover aligns with this idea of providers simultaneously testing multiple variants. It seems less likely they're making fundamental breakthroughs that quickly.
Right.
More likely they're running parallel experiments and releasing the winner when it's ready.
And interestingly, they noted that academic labs didn't seem to be doing this private testing.
Yeah, during the period they studied, no private models were tested by academic labs, which might suggest, either they weren't aware the policy didn't have the resources, or maybe just have a different approach to evaluation.
Which points to an uneven playing field.
Definitely. Okay, so building on that idea of uneven advantages, let's talk about data access.
The data. Always crucial in AI. How does access to the Chatbot Arena data itself vary?
Well, the Arena generates incredibly valuable data, right? All those user prompts, the preferences. I liked Model A better than Model B. That's gold dust for improving these models.
For sure. Direct user feedback.
But the paper shows there are some pretty big imbalances in who actually gets their hands on this data and gets to learn from it.
Okay, what causes those imbalances?
Well, first, it links back to what we just talked about, private testing.
More tests, more data.
Exactly. The more private variants you run, the more interactions you collect data from. They even mentioned an experiment Cohere ran showing that going from 1 to 3 private variants boosted their prompt collection from like 6% to over 19% of the relevant data pool.
Wow, just by adding 2 more variants.
Yeah. Then there's the sampling rate. How often does a specific model even get shown to users for a comparison?
So some models get more screen time than others.
Much more. Figure 5 in the paper apparently shows huge discrepancies. Models from OpenAI and Google could hit daily sampling rates up to 34%.
A third of the time.
Yeah, whereas others, like maybe Allen AI, were down around 3.3%. So the big players just get way more exposure, way more feedback. It creates a strong feedback loop.
A more than tenfold difference. That's a massive. Any other factors?
Yeah, another interesting one is silent model deprecation.
Silent deprecation.
So while Chatbot Arena has official policies for retiring models, the researchers found way more models 205 versus only 47 officially deprecated that were effectively just faded out. By dropping their sampling rate down to almost 0 without any public announcement, so they just stopped being evaluated silently.
Okay. And one more factor.
API support. If a provider integrates their model using an API, they get 100% of the prompt data from battles involving their model.
Makes sense.
But if your model is hosted by someone else, a third party, you might only get access to maybe 20% of that data.
So if you're smaller, maybe an academic lab using a shared platform, you're getting way less data back.
Precisely. You're at a disadvantage both in getting seen and in learning from the interactions you do get.
So what's the cumulative effect of all this, all these data access differences?
It's pretty dramatic. Figure 4, conceptually, sums it up. The paper estimates that 4 big players, OpenAI, Google, Meta, and Anthropic, collectively gather almost 63% of all the data generated on Chatbot Arena.
63% just between those 4.
Yeah. And get this, that's 68 times more data than the top academic and nonprofit labs combined.
68 times. That's not just a gap, that's a canyon.
It really is a huge disparity in the resource that arguably matters most for improvement.
And does the paper show this data advantage actually, works? Does it lead to better arena performance?
It seems so. Figure 10 conceptually shows experiments where training models on Chatbot Arena data significantly boosted their win rates on Arena Hard. That's a benchmark closely tied to the arena itself. They found that going from 0% arena data in training to 70% more than doubled the win rates.
Doubled.
Yeah. So It really suggests that having privileged access to that arena data lets you specifically optimize for the arena test. It could become a self-reinforcing cycle for those at the top.
Wow. Okay, so beyond the provider behaviors and data access, the paper also digs into the ranking system itself, the Bradley-Terry model.
Exactly. I mean, the BT model is a principled, statistically sound method in theory, but its effectiveness really depends on certain assumptions being met.
And the researchers argue those assumptions don't always hold up in the Chatbot Arena environment.
Right. They focus on two main violated assumptions.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is the assumption of constant evaluation conditions. This relates to transitivity in rankings. You know, if A beats B and D beats C, then A should beat C.
Makes sense.
But that logic kind of relies on the game being played staying the same over time. The evaluation conditions need to be consistent.
But on a platform like Chatbot Arena, driven by users, things change all the time, don't they?
Absolutely. The kinds of prompts people submit evolve. Their complexity changes. Even the language balance shifts. Figure 11 apparently shows this English usage going down over time, while Chinese, Russian, Korean prompts are increasing.
So the test itself is changing.
Right. And add to that the model deprecation we talked about, models being removed. It means some older models were never evaluated under the current conditions, against the current prompts, or even against the current top models.
So a model ranked high based on past performance against older models and different prompts might not actually be preferred by users today.
That's the potential issue. Its historical rank might persist even if it wouldn't win head-to-head now. The paper simulated this too, in Figure 14.
And the simulation showed.
It showed how changing the task distribution and removing models can indeed lead to unreliable rankings, compared to a baseline where everything is continuously evaluated under the changing conditions.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second violated assumption?
The second one is the assumption of a fully interconnected comparison network.
Meaning?
Ideally, for the BT model to give a robust ranking, every model should be compared directly or indirectly with every other model. There should be pathways of comparison linking everyone.
Like a well-connected tournament bracket?
Kind of, yeah. But with models constantly being added and, more importantly, removed at a high rate, which Figure 13 conceptually illustrates that network of comparisons can become sparse.
Sparse, meaning lots of gaps. Models that haven't really been compared against each other, even indirectly.
Exactly. You might get clusters of models that have mostly been compared within their cluster, but not much across clusters.
And that causes problems for the ranking.
It can. Statisticians pointed this out way back, like Ford in 1957. If you can split the models into isolated groups with few or no comparisons between them, a single reliable overall ranking becomes statistically problematic, potentially distorted.
Okay.
And again, the researchers simulated this Figure 15. They showed that when the comparison graph is sparse, the resulting rankings can diverge significantly from the gold standard you'd get with a dense, well-connected graph.
So the constant churn of models isn't just changing the conditions, it's potentially weakening the very structure of the comparison data needed for reliable ranking.
That seems to be the argument, yeah. The dynamics of the arena itself might be undermining the statistical foundations.
Okay, let's shift slightly to the prompts themselves. The paper mentions prompt duplication and distribution shifts.
Yeah.
How does that fit in?
Well, beyond just the types of questions changing over time, the paper points out a surprisingly high level of repeated prompts, like exact duplicates or very near duplicate.
Really? People asking the exact same thing over and over?
Apparently, yes, both within the same month and carrying over from one month to the next.
How much duplication are we talking about?
Figures 12 and 16 conceptually show this. On average, they lost about 20% of prompts just by removing exact duplicates within a month.
20%.
And they found something like 7.3% of prompts from December 2024 showed up again, word for word, in January 2025.
Wow.
And if you consider near duplicates, the overlap is even higher.
So if you're a provider with access to recent prompt data,
yeah, you have a pretty good idea of what specific questions are likely to come up again soon.
Which means you can potentially fine-tune your model to ace those specific recurring prompts.
Exactly. It allows for another layer of optimization that might be more about anticipating the test questions than about general capability improvement.
Right. And did the paper say anything about whether the arena prompts are representative of, like, normal, everyday AI use?
Yeah, they raise some interesting questions there.
Like what?
Well, the prompt length limit, 12,000 characters, might cut off longer, more complex requests people make in the real world.
Okay, could be.
And also, the user base. Chatbot Arena users probably lean more towards developers, researchers, AI enthusiasts, right?
Probably, yeah.
So they might ask certain kinds of questions more often, puzzles, math, coding, trivia maybe, and maybe fewer questions about other things.
Uh-huh.
They mentioned one analysis of a public arena data set that found 0 prompts about Chaucer, but loads about Star Trek.
Huh. Okay, maybe not the most balanced literary analysis tool then.
Right. So the point is, optimizing purely for Chatbot Arena might not make your model the best for, say, general customer service or creative writing, help in a commercial product. The skills needed might be slightly different.
That's a really crucial point for anyone using the leaderboard to pick a model for a specific application. Success there doesn't guarantee success everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've laid out all these issues, the private testing, the data access gaps, the ranking system quirks, the prompt characteristics that contribute to this potential leaderboard illusion. What do they suggest doing about it? How can trust be restored?
They offer some pretty concrete recommendations for the Chatbot Arena organizers. Sensible stuff, mostly aimed at transparency and fairness.
Like what?
Firstly, they say providers shouldn't be allowed to retract scores after submitting a model.
So no takebacks if a test run doesn't go well.
Right. They argue all results, even from private tests, should be permanently public. That would stop the cherry picking of only the best runs.
Okay, that makes sense. More transparency. What else?
They suggest setting clear public limits on how many private variants a provider can test for each model release, to kind of level the playing field on that front.
Curb the massive N and the best of N strategy.
Exactly. And also, implement fairer sampling rates. Maybe go back to what they call active sampling.
How's that?
Strategically choosing which models to compare, maybe focusing on ones that haven't been evaluated much or ones showing high variability, rather than just defaulting to showing the big proprietary models most often.
So a more balanced evaluation diet for all models.
Kind of, yeah, to get a better picture across the board.
What about retiring models? The silent deprecation issue.
They say Chatbot Arena needs much clearer policies there. Define the criteria for when a model gets retired, and don't just silently drop its sampling rate to 0. Be upfront about it.
Makes sense.
They even suggest a more nuanced approach, maybe stratifying retirement based on whether a model is proprietary, open weight, or open source, and how it's performing within its category. The goal being to keep strong models, especially maybe open ones, visible for comparison longer.
Those all sound like pretty reasonable steps, addressing the core concerns they raised.
Yeah, they seem aimed at making the whole process more transparent and equitable.
So let's try and wrap this up. For our listeners trying to navigate this AI landscape, what's the single biggest takeaway from this deep dive into the leaderboard illusion?
I think the core message is that Chatbot Arena has been and still is a really valuable tool for the community. No doubt about that.
Right.
But its current structure, some of the ways it operates, well, they raise legitimate questions about how much we should rely on its rankings as the absolute final word on which model is best.
The leaderboard illusion, yeah.
Yeah.
That top score might be influenced by more than just pure capability.
Exactly. The private testing, the data access differences, the ranking system dynamics, all the stuff we talked about. It means high scores might not always reflect genuine, broad progress in the way we assume.
And for you, the listener, maybe trying to quickly get up to speed or make choices based on these rankings.
This research gives you some important context, Ray. It's a prompt to be a bit critical, to look beyond just that #1 spot.
To approach any single benchmark, really, with a degree of healthy skepticism. Understand its limitations. So, okay, considering all of this, maybe here's a final thought for you to chew on. If Chatbot Arena, as influential as it is, has these potential flaws, how should we be evaluating and comparing these incredibly complex generative models moving forward?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
What other ways, what supplementary metrics, or maybe different kinds of evaluations could give us a more holistic, more reliable picture of AI capabilities beyond just a leaderboard rank?
Yeah, what does truly measuring progress look like?
It's definitely something critical to think about as this field keeps exploding. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.